Hey, everybody. This next interview will blow your mind. It's with a fellow who has, as a lawyer, done over 100 jury trials, but is also a fourth-generation psychic. His father was a psychic and a Navy SEAL. Mom was a designer and also psychic. The family stories are amazing. The connection between science and faith is truly remarkable. And this is an area that I absolutely love because it doesn't seem to me that these areas should be in conflict. And he shows scientifically how these areas interconnect. His book is called The Afterlife Frequency. Enjoy the interview. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Next Level Healing. I'm your host, Dr. Tara Perry. I am beyond excited today to introduce to you somebody that you're probably maybe already familiar with. His name is Mark Anthony. He is known as the Psychic Explorer. He is a fourth-generation psychic medium who communicates with spirits. He's an Oxford-educated attorney, talk about a juxtaposition of characteristics there, who has tried over 100 jury trials and is licensed to practice law in Florida, Washington, D.C., and before the United States Supreme Court. He was named Best Psychic Medium in the, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, OMI Awards.
Yes.
Sponsored by Om Times and iSpirit Media. Mark Anthony is known as the Psychic Explorer due to his extensive background in, this is a huge list and I love it, science, quantum physics, survival of consciousness, near-death experiences, which we've covered quite a bit on the show, history, archaeology, philosophy, and theology. He examines mystical locations in the United States and remote corners of the world to explore ancient ruins, mysteries, and supernatural phenomena. Mark has appeared on many radio and television shows. On the CBS hit show The Doctors, he conducted a reading which cracked a cold case murder. Mark's multiple award-winning bestsellers include The Afterlife Frequency, Evidence of Eternity, and Never Letting Go, which is recommended by grief counselors and hospices worldwide. He's a headline speaker at conventions and expo around the world, and his credentials go on and on. Welcome, Mark Anthony.
Thank you so much, Tara. It's great to be here. I've really been looking forward to being here on Next Level Healing, and I'm very impressed with the work that you do because it's so positive. And it's important for us to take these spiritual and metaphysical, what used to be fringe topics, and put it out there because we've become mainstream.
Well, what's so nice now, and this is what I talk about constantly, it's really nice to see the convergence of these supernatural phenomena, which aren't really supernatural at all.
Right.
It's natural. It's just that in 3D, you don't understand other dimensionalities and other perspectives quite so easily. So it's really exciting to watch that unfold and also to see what that does for people. As you've mentioned in your book, there's certain, for example, near-death experiences which are now quantified. I mean, it's been looked at from many different points of view. It's been collected, the data has been analyzed, and the p-values, which is how you determine whether in science something's real or not, are just out to 1 in a billion and beyond. So it's kind of past the point of arguing whether or not this is real or not, because there's so many veridical examples. But talk to our audience about, when somebody's had a near-death experience, and I'd love for you to share yours, which you had when you were 4 years old. How does that change a person, and what are the commonalities that somebody can expect to experience if they come out of a near-death experience? What kind of shift in reality is that for them?
Wow, that's a lot of questions. That's a whole lecture, and I love it. Thank you, Tara. I appreciate it.
Hey, guys. Studies are showing that 68% of people that watch podcasts regularly don't click the subscribe button. Do me a huge favor. If you like this content, click subscribe so other people know where to go for the cool stuff. Thank you.
First off, with my NDE, I don't want to go into extreme detail because I cover that very heavily in my book, The Afterlife Frequency. And it is what happened to me and what I experienced is so integral to the entire book. If I give it away here, it'll diminish what people are going to get out of my book. But see, having had an NDE at such a young age, it's hard for me to say how it changed my life because I was 4. You know, people say, well, what about the life review? It's like, what? I was going to say, like, which sippy cup I like better, you know? But the thing is, in all joking aside, it certainly set the tone for the direction of my life, because before that, I was already seeing spirits, and both my parents were mediums. My dad was a Navy SEAL, and my mother was a commercial illustrator, and that their story is quite fascinating. But about 6 months after that, I got very, very ill, and I went into cardiopulmonary failure. And so I had this experience, and I came back, and it changed the direction of my life. Now, in my work as a near-death experience researcher, I've dealt with hundreds of people who've had near-death experiences, and it is without a doubt a life-changing event. My friend and colleague, Dr. Yvonne Kaysen, calls it a spiritually transformative experience, an STE. And one thing for all the listeners, once you start dealing with the metaphysical realm, it's like science or law. We have an acronym for everything: an NDE, near-death experience; STE, shared death experience; DBV, deathbed vision; ADC, after-death communication. I mean, you're just going to hear a lot of acronyms. But what happens with near-death experiences, and they have been studied worldwide, and there's 2 organizations, the International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANS, and then NDERF, the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation that my friend and colleague, Dr. Jeffrey Long, founded. And NDERF is really amazing because it's a global database. So people from all over the world and doctors all over the world who have patients that have had an NDE, they compile it. And here's what's fascinating is the data correlates. You know, people would think that, oh, you have a near-death experience if you're Christian and you believe in a certain way, except this database includes people from not just North and South America, but Europe, China, an atheist country, Muslim countries like Iran and Egypt and Morocco, Buddhist countries, certainly India, Hindu country. And there are several similarities. People feel a separation from their body. They may feel a floating sensation. They have veridical perception, which means they may see, if it's in an operating room, what the operating team is doing. If it's a car accident, they may see what people are doing in the aftermath of that. Sometimes their spirit will wander around, like down the hallway in a hospital, and hear what their family members are saying or praying. Then there's stages to it. Then they may go through a tunnel towards a light. And then when you get into the light, you will encounter loved ones that have passed. And then if you go even further, you will get to what I call the divine power we call God, because even the word God is too limiting. And you will be filled with this sense of euphoria, love, and you get this weightlessness. It's the way I can describe it from how I've felt it is if you're in a pool or the ocean and that the water is that perfect temperature that you can't even, tell the difference between yourself and your body. You feel no pain. You don't even feel your body, except you feel this sense of interconnectedness. And that's another one of these similarities, the interconnectedness. Fascinating. My friend and colleague, Dr. Nancy Evans Bush, and she is pushing 90, and she still is working on books. Nancy's amazing. She wrote that most near-death experiencers don't think there's a God. They know there's a God. And in her work, she's found that people who claim to have been atheists return from the experience saying, oh, no, there's a God. Race, religion, gender, socioeconomic status doesn't matter. Whether or not you believed in an afterlife doesn't matter. So there's all these similarities. And the thing is, near-death experiences have been documented for thousands of years. They didn't know what to call them.
Actually, you have a great list in your book of some of the superstars that did document these, including St. Francis of Assisi, who I adore. I love the Prayer of St. Francis. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Sir Winston Churchill, and you've got some great Churchill stories as well. Abraham Lincoln, Carl Jung, Queen Victoria, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Quite a list.
Yeah, even movie star Elizabeth Taylor had a near-death experience, and she was interviewed, I believe it was by Barbara Walters, and Barbara Walters said, "So who did you see?" She was expecting it would be Richard Burton. It was Michael Todd. It was her very first husband, and Elizabeth Taylor was very much a believer in near-death experiences, and Plato is believed to have had a near-death experience because in his book, The Republic, he writes what has been called the myth of E-R. And was a warrior who died in battle, and according to Greek custom, they stick him on a pyre, and they're lighting the pyre, and all of a sudden he comes out of it, and they're like, "Oh, get him off there!" And he begins to tell everybody how he
comes out of it after 10 days. I actually have this in my notes.
After 10 days, after 10 days, he was probably comatose. He was probably comatose, but comatose people also have NDEs. Like Dr. Evan Alexander, he did not die. Technically, his body was still working, but they said his brain was so filled with infection.
He's been on our show too.
Yeah, Evan, he's a friend of mine, and Evan's awesome. And so comes out of this, and he starts talking about things about seeing deceased loved ones, talks about the divine light, and he also talked about living a series of lifetimes, but between them drinking from the fountain of forgetfulness. Long story short, the ancient Greeks did not believe in reincarnation. So now Irv's talking about reincarnation, which is another side effect of an NDE. People who emerge from it believe in reincarnation. They believe that we're all interconnected energetically. I'm giving away a little bit of one of my lectures. My analysis of the book of Jonah, in the Old Testament, the book of Jonah. Jonah was a prophet. He was supposed to go to Iraq, and he didn't want to go to Iraq. Back then they called it Assyria, and he was supposed to go to the capital of the Assyrians, Nineveh. And he's like, "No, I'm not doing that." So he hops a ship for Spain, heading in the opposite direction. Well, God apparently didn't like that. Sent this terrible storm. When the crew finds out Jonah disobeyed God, they promptly threw him overboard, to which then he's swallowed by a great fish, and after 3 days is vomited up. First off, there's nothing that could swallow a human being. Even a whale's esophagus is roughly 5 to 6 inches in diameter. And if something did swallow him, nobody's going to be able to survive the stomach acids of any type of predatory fish. It is believed, and I believe this, that many people take the Bible literally. So if you take the Bible literally, that's fine, but Jesus taught through parables, which are metaphors. Interestingly enough, so did Buddha. When you read the book of Jonah, the way he describes how he descended and then the Lord lifted him up, it follows the sequelae, the symptoms of a near-death experience. So it is very possible that the book of Jonah may be the earliest recorded NDE on record. Now, for our literalist friends, in 2022, Mike Packard was a lobster diver off of Provincetown on Cape Cod, and he was going to get a lobster, and all of a sudden he felt engulfed by something. At first he thought it was a great white shark, but he didn't feel any teeth. He just felt this pressure, and then he thought, "I'm dead." It was a humpback whale, took him in his mouth, and then all of a sudden spit him out. And he was injured, and he was in the hospital, but then, you see, in ancient times, you ended up in scripture, but in modern times, he actually ended up on the Jimmy Kimmel show, being hailed as the modern-day Jonah. So for our friends who take a literalist interpretation of the Bible, hey, maybe Jonah was, not swallowed, but
Carried around in the mouth
carried around in the mouth of a whale. And the whale's probably like, what is this? Because they use a little tiny curling thing. It'd be like taking a piece of gristle and the whale promptly spit it out. So I'm sure the whale was equally repulsed as Jonah or as Michael Packard was. But the thing is, these type of phenomena have been documented for just thousands of years. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens is believed to be an account of a near-death experience, and that the three spirits, the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, the ghost of Christmas yet to come, were the life review. So think about it. Ebenezer Scrooge, he's the very epitome of narcissism, materialistic, nasty, only cares about himself. And on Christmas Eve, he encounters the spirit of Jacob Marley, his former partner. So this could be analogized to encountering people that you know who are in spirit. And then throughout the course of this, he is shown what he used to be. A young man, there was love in his heart. He really liked this woman, but then the materialism began to grow, the self-centeredness. The ghost of Christmas present, he was then shown what he had become. Mean, nasty, self-centered, nobody liked him, everybody made fun of him, despised him beyond his back. And then there was a projection of what might happen in the future when he died and nobody would even care. He'd just be a lost thought. So he emerges from the experience a changed man. He starts becoming charitable, loving, giving. These are the things that happen to people when they emerge from a near-death experience. People lose the sense of materialism. They look at everyone as brothers and sisters, how we're all interconnected. And Charles Dickens, we have to keep in mind, was a genius. He was a literary genius. And he had been in a couple train wrecks in his life. He had come very close to losing his life on several accounts. And the ghost of Christmas yet to come could be analogized to what we call a DNDE, a distressing near-death experience, also known as a hellish NDE, where people, they have these experiences and they get really scared from what they're exposed to. Now, does this mean there is a hell, or is this a cosmic wake-up call? So it's an interesting
Well, you write
thought.
about this in your book also. You tell this wonderful story about not a
Thor.
great human being that wanted that came back, and you were terrified because he's like you had been involved in his legal case, and he went against your legal advice and showed up after a much lengthier stay in prison. Tell us quickly that story. That's because it's really fascinating how
I want people to read that. That's in my book. But suffice it to say, in the course of my law practice, I came into contact with a lot of people, and some of them not so savory. And Thor was a fascinating person. He was as mean and nasty and evil as it gets, but he had a near-death experience, except he had a distressing near-death experience. So
what percentage of near-death experiences? You had mentioned your friend Jeffrey Long, according to the Near-Death Research Foundation, 774 NDEs occur in the U.S. daily alone.
Yeah.
That's a huge number.
It is, and people have been very afraid to talk about it because of the social stigma. It's becoming more accepted now. Roughly 5% of the near-death experiences appear to be the hellish NDEs, because people say there's a devil, there's demons, there's this, there's that, and maybe there is, maybe there isn't, or maybe this is a way for you to get a wake-up call. Because
what percentage of those people who have those hellish ones go on to live better lives? I'm guessing it's pretty high.
Very high. As far as we can tell, it's pretty much every one. I mean, after you see something like that, they're telling you, we're giving you a chance, okay? Unless you are about as dumb as it gets, you're going to change.
So wouldn't the world be like demonstrably better, like very quickly, if everybody had a near-death experience?
Well, don't we already? I mean, look at what's happening in the world. Human beings, on one hand, are the most remarkable creatures, and yet the most foolish. It's as if we're a bunch of baboons in a china shop with, we have hammers running around. We had this beautiful, pristine world hand grenades. We've been through 2 world wars in the last century, and now we're on the verge of the 3rd one, except, too many countries, everybody has wants and has nuclear weapons. If the hellish conditions on this planet aren't a wake-up call enough, I don't know what is. And, I know a lot of my colleagues are like, oh, let's just raise our vibration and everything will be better. And it's like, well, we can sit there and send happy thoughts to Vladimir Putin and ISIS all day long, but I don't think it's going to have much of an effect. Those people have to have an inner change. That being said, that doesn't mean that we should not, on an individual and group basis, make each day count and be as good as we can. Because the more people that embrace the light, the less effect the people who foster the darkness and the aggression are going to have power. Putin only has power because the people around him are terrified of him and allow him to have it. And the same thing, with ISIS, they're able to recruit these people that do these things. And I don't want to get political, but you can pick any time frame in history. People say, oh, today's so horrible. What, like the Roman Empire was a picnic?
100%.
Getting thrown into the arena to be the entertainment on a Saturday afternoon wasn't so much fun. How about the medieval era, the Black Death, the Black bubonic plague? That was a real, and you go throughout history, there's never been this utopia where everybody held hands and sung Kumbaya. And I still don't think it's wrong to strive for that or pointless. What I think is, based on my experience as a medium, and I was raised in the Catholic faith, and there's heaven, there's hell, and then of course there's purgatory. Purgatory is like cosmic probation. You're not bad enough to go to hell, but not good enough to go to heaven, so they stick you in purgatory for 50,000 years or whatever. I'm making a joke here, but it is not unusual. Most belief systems have different levels to the other side. Islam has 7 different levels to heaven. The LDS, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church has 3 different levels of heaven. The Hindus and the Buddhists have a multitude of levels, so they're frequencies. I think when we describe this in 21st century terms, we talk about frequencies. I don't believe that there is an eternal pit of suffering that you and I would call hell. I believe that is here on earth, and that we live a succession of lifetimes, because that's another thing, and I touched on that earlier with near-death experiences, is people who emerge from it believe in reincarnation. And I'm giving lectures at a couple different venues, the Edgar Cayce Center Field Conference at Unity of Tampa in late April, and then in early May at Edgar Cayce's headquarters in Virginia Beach on the science of reincarnation and near-death experiences. So we have one life, it's eternal, but we come into this world, then we leave it, then we come back, and it's an eternal cycle, the flow of life. So why do we need hell when we've got Gaza, Ukraine, Somalia, starvation throughout the world, people in the United States who are just homeless and suffering? Hell exists here on planet Earth. We don't need a jerk with a pitchfork sticking you in the butt to motivate you to do negative things.
Are you a Buckminster Fuller fan? He said, I don't know if it's going to be utopia or oblivion, but it's going to be a touch-and-go relay race right up to the very end.
In this world, up to the very end? I would say to some extent that's true. I'd say to a large extent we create our reality. However, to a large extent as well, let's say people get cancer. Well, they didn't want to have it. They didn't make it happen. So I would say there's quite a bit of validity to that statement.
In the Diamond Sutra, it talks about how nothing is more powerful than an individual experiencing enlightenment. What are your thoughts on that? Because, and Byron Katie likes to talk about there's your business, there's other people's business, and there's God's business, and the only sane thing to pay attention to is your business, and that doesn't mean not taking part in what you can to make the world a better place. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because I know you've studied the Vedas, and your knowledge base of many different thought traditions around the world is rather enormous.
I think that's a very powerful statement, because you're looking at things from your perspective, and nothing's more powerful than an enlightening experience. I've certainly had more than one, but one in particular that definitely changed the direction of my lifetime. And the question, though, is once you have that enlightenment experience, what are you going to do with it? And I think start with yourself. Before you start trying to save everybody else, you've got to work on yourself.
Take the plank out of your own eye.
Yeah, precisely. So I would agree with that. But you also have to realize that once you have that enlightenment experience, like I said, how do you apply it? Anybody can be enlightened when you're sitting on a mountaintop in Sedona. Okay, it's beautiful. It's like, oh, I'm so at peace with the universe. And all right, now you're stuck in traffic in LA. All right. And you got to be somewhere in 5 minutes, and there's no way you're going to get there. And it's just miserable. And you had too much water to drink before you went. It's like, and so that's the real challenge. The real challenge is when you're in your everyday life. Is that where you're enlightened? Because people go around, oh, yes, I was at this mountaintop and I was so connected to the universe. Well, that's not just an isolated incident. You're supposed to be connected everywhere, and that is the challenge. I got to admit, I'm not always that guy. I remember there was this old Disney cartoon. It was so funny. It was Goofy, and he comes out of a house in the morning and said, he's mild-mannered, and he's super nice and all that. But then when he gets behind the wheel of a car, his fangs grow and he turns into this monster. And they were explaining about when it was a cartoon probably made in the 1950s to teach children about power, and that some people think that getting behind the wheel of a car gives you power. And they showed how mild-mannered Goofy turned into this almost werewolf-like creature. And because he was behind the wheel of a car, that didn't give him a license to be aggressive and rude and nasty. And so I always enjoyed how we can make a point through fantasy. Through fantasy and fiction, you can overemphasize something to make it a point.
So hell is basically the 405 freeway.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I didn't understand until recently that psychic ability actually does run in families. And you're a fourth generation psychic, and there's some really interesting stories about your family and their experiences. And the one with your aunt particularly indicates why people didn't want to talk about this, and your father's admonitions to not share this because people might not be ready for it. Would you tell our listeners about that?
Certainly. When I was around 3.5 years old, I started seeing spirits. And all of a sudden, which is on its face not unusual for a toddler to have invisible friends. But when mommy and daddy can see who I'm talking to, and I remember mom going, oh, he's got it. And my dad was like, God, geez, he's got it, And my parents were just talk about this to us. And I remember I started first grade when I was 5, and when I was getting ready, and I went to Catholic school. And my dad said, do not talk about this to anyone except your mother and me, because people who see things others don't get taken away. That really got my attention. And, then when I was in Catholic school, they're talking about angels and saints and all these invisible entities. I thought, well, this is great. And then I started listening to more about what they were saying and realizing, maybe I shouldn't talk about what goes on at my house. But what had happened, and I didn't figure this out or discover this until I was in my 20s, My father, he had 4 siblings, 3 sisters and a brother. And one of his sisters, Marjorie, had these abilities, as did his mother, Isabel, and maternal grandmother, Grace. And then it also runs on my mom's side of the family. That's a whole nother story. But about 20 years before I was born, Marjorie, she was married to this guy who was a religious fanatic, and I'm being kind here. He didn't like her abilities. He thought they were from Satan. But she could anticipate future events in addition to seeing spirits. And one day he was getting ready to go to work, and he worked as a machinist at a steel plant in Pennsylvania. And Marjorie had a terrible feeling that morning, and her stomach was hurting because it's near your solar plexus. And she had a big argument with him and begged him to stay home. And he was like, oh, you and your voodoo stuff. And they got, but he decided to stay home because she was crying. Well, that day at the steel plant, Tara, this crane was lifting thousands of pounds of steel beams. And suddenly the cable snapped and the beams crushed the machine shop that he worked in and killed everybody in it. Now, there was about a 99% chance he would have been in the machine shop. And instead of being grateful, it intensified his fear of Marjorie. And he conspired with an unscrupulous psychiatrist who diagnosed her as a paranoid schizophrenic. And they sent an ambulance to her home. 2 guys in white coats came out. They forcibly removed her from her home, put her in a straitjacket, took her to a mental institution where she was subjected to electroshock therapy for over 6 months. They did so much. My dad said they did so much damage to her that when she emerged from that experience, she was a shadow of what she had once been. She never talked about seeing spirits ever again. And that's why I realized when I was a little boy, because my dad scared me. He's like, you don't talk to anybody, And then I realized, my dad was a Navy SEAL, and sometimes he wasn't always as cuddly in his delivery. He loved us very much. Dad was real tactile. He would hug us, but sometimes when he was telling us something, you better listen. Now I understand why he was afraid, because back in those days, we were treated as mentally ill, delusional. People were afraid of us. There's countries in the world today, and I'll name it, Saudi Arabia being one of them, where people that exhibit these abilities are beheaded. Okay, this is the 21st century. So psychics and mediums have been persecuted throughout the century. Look at, say, Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc, who heard voices, and she was able to lead the French army to victory in the 100 Years' War, and she gets repaid by being...
And was later canonized, but boy, did they not thank her at the time.
No, they burned her at the stake. Yeah, so throughout history, a lot of psychics and mediums have always been there. And one of the lectures that I give is called Rulers, Royals, Psychics, and Spirits, Mystics Behind the Thrones of Power. And since ancient times all the way through the U.S. presidency, in fact, roughly 1/3 of U.S. presidents have had psychic experiences or consulted with psychic advisors. And it's all very hush-hush.
Nancy Reagan was very well known for that, wasn't she?
Nancy Reagan, yes, she was, with Joan Quigley, who was an astrologer. And I knew people that worked on the Hill, and they said, one of us said, yeah, Nancy was a pain in the ass because she'd go see that astrologer, then we had to change the president's schedule around. But she, especially after Reagan got shot, she was very protective. Jeane Dixon is arguably the most influential psychic advisor. Jeane Dixon, we know, advised Franklin Delano Roosevelt. She advised John F. Kennedy. She advised Richard Nixon. In fact, she even begged John F. Kennedy not to go to Dallas. She had a real bad feeling.
Wow.
And she even predicted the death of his brother, Robert Kennedy. She was at an interview at the Ambassador Hotel in LA, and somebody said, "Do you think Bobby Kennedy's going to be president?" And she said, "No, he will never be president because of something that'll happen right here in this hotel." 1 week later at the Ambassador Hotel in LA, he was gunned down by Sirhan Sirhan.
This is really one of the things also scientifically I love about your books is you talk about the equipment that we have in our bodies to feel these kinds of things. Of course, there's the pineal gland, which has been written about also for millennia, and the solar plexus, the second brain, and numerous times in your book, you're talking about people who have a bad feeling, and then of course something horrible does happen. There's this fabulous book, I'm sure you're familiar with, Gavin de Becker's The Gift of Fear. It's a wonderful tool that we have, and something your father always used to say to you, two things when you would go off to school. One is, "I love you," which is always important to say to the people around you, because we never are guaranteed we're going to be able to see them again. And then the second is, "Be aware."
Be aware.
And that can save your life too. So speak to us about the equipment that we have and the importance of being aware.
We have two major receptors in our body. See, everybody's capable of having a psychic or mediumistic experience, although not everyone's a psychic or a medium. In other words, we can all swim, but we're not all going to be, Michael Phelps and win, 20 gold medals. We can all play guitar, but we're not going to be a Slash or a Jimmy Page or, whoever's considered a great guitarist these days. The thing is, we just are all good at different things. And the pineal gland is behind the center of the forehead. For people who do yoga, that's the third eye chakra, which is associated with the indigo color. And if you go about 4 inches behind the center of your forehead in the brain, there's a small gland between the size of a grain of rice and a lima bean, and that's the pineal gland. And it's the most complicated and misunderstood and most studied gland in the body. It's the mysterious. It has a tremendous amount of functions. It regulates brainwave frequencies, circadian rhythms. In other words, when we're hungry, when we're tired, when we're, feeling frisky. It processes or helps us process and understand light. And also, it has been found to have calcite and magnetite crystal fragments within it. So the first radio was quartz crystal with copper wire running electricity through it. So we have this very sophisticated radio station in our head that regulates brainwave frequencies, controls our perception of light. And then we have the solar plexus, which is at the bottom of the rib cage. And for our yoga friends, that's the solar plexus chakra, the yellow chakra. It's the pit of the stomach. That's why, women's intuition, where do you feel it? You feel it there, right? Hey, guys, gut instinct. Because guys don't like to say they're intuitive. We want to be more Denzel or Harrison Ford or Chris Pratt, and the thing is, the solar plexus is the second most complex bundle of nerves outside of the cerebral cortex, and it's been referred to as the second brain. Other creatures have more than one brain. An octopus has 9 brains, one in its head and one for each of its 8 arms. Okay, so other beings on this planet have more than one brain. The solar plexus is where we pick up the emotional, the feeling, the sensory things. The pineal gland is where we get the visions, the data, the auditory information. So everybody has these 2 areas in your body. It's just some people may be more developed than others, and you can work with it to enhance it. But once again, not everyone's going to be a medium or a psychic. And I know there's all these courses, be a medium. And I've seen some people just get so frustrated because they can't do it. It's like, you're not going to make me a javelin thrower in the Olympics. Okay, I mean, I can throw a spear around, but I'm not going to be throwing a javelin, 300 feet or whatever it is that they do. And you just have to realize that's okay to work with it. But if it doesn't get to the point that you want it to, don't beat yourself up. Okay. So everybody has these physiological, we have the same basic physiology. And like I said, some people are simply more developed at it than others. Okay. What was the second part of your question?
Gosh, when I'm talking to you, I have 100 questions coming to me all at once. So basically, I wanted to just understand the basics of the equipment so that people have an understanding of that. I hate to jump off to something completely different, but I'm so curious your parents and how they met. And when two psychics meet, I mean, there must be a certain amount of relief because it's like two aliens meeting. And especially at a time when it wasn't really safe to talk about this, it must be a huge just sense of relief to go, wow, I'm not alone. There's people like me. There's people who can see, experience, download these pieces of information. Can you tell us about that at all?
Yeah. My dad had just gotten out of the Navy. So here he is, 22-year-old sailor, all full of himself. And, he walks into this dance. I think it was a USO dance. And he said, I saw this foxy looking dame. He was talking about my mom. And what's funny is he thought she was like 30 years old because she was decked out to the nines. What it was, my mom worked for a high-end department store, and she was in the fashion department. In fact, back at the time, my mom used to be a leg model for stockings because she had these beautiful, they used to say that my mother had Betty Grable legs. And in World War II, Betty Grable, her legs were so beautiful, she had them insured at the time by Lloyd's of London for $1 million. In today's dollars, that would be like $100 million. All right. So this is some time after that. And my mom had these beautiful legs, but she was only 19 years old, So my dad goes up and says, hey, can we dance and all this? And they were both really good dancers, and he wanted to see her again. So they met at another dance. And at the third dance, she said to him, my mother's name is Jean. We call her Jeannie. My dad's name was Earl. She goes, before this goes any further, this is something you need to know about me. She goes, I see spirits. And to which my father replies, as only a sailor can, a bunch of colorful metaphors followed by, I do too.
Oh my gosh, this is such a great story. I love this.
And then they realized that their connection was more than just he was a hot sailor and she was a foxy-looking dame. And my mother was a good Catholic Italian girl. Her family came from Italy, and her father was born in Italy, and her mother was born here. But her mother's mother, Giovanna, was a well-respected psychic. And in fact, she was known in the Italian community of Little Italy in North Jersey as the woman who knows things. And officials from the Catholic Church would come to talk to her, meet with her, discuss theological questions with her. And in fact, in 2016, PBS did a special. It was a 4-hour, 2-night special called The Italian Americans. And they actually did an entire segment on Giovanna and referenced her psychic abilities. And it was so cool because when it was on, like all my cousins, we're calling each other every commercial break, did you see that? And so this this is a genetic trait that runs in my family. And it's what's known as a recessive genetic trait. For example, a dominant genetic trait would be right-handedness, okay? A recessive genetic trait would be left-handedness. And so because it skips a generation, not everybody has it. So when you get two parents with the same recessive trait, the likelihood that one or more of their children are going to have that trait increases. And that happened to be me.
Did any of your brothers and sisters inherit this?
They're very intuitive. Yes, they're not mediums, but for example, I was talking to my brother one day on the phone, and he goes, God, I got this really bad feeling that my son's somehow going to get cut. He goes, that's so weird. And all of a sudden I hear, Dad, and my nephew was outside, and he was sawing something, and the saw slipped and sliced his hand open, and my brother goes, gotta go.
Oh my God.
So yeah, our whole lives were like that as well. And my books have these stories. The thing about my books, they educate but entertain, and I introduce a lot of scientific concepts. And I don't want to scare anybody away because, look, I suffered through a lot of very boring books in the practice of law. I mean, if you can't sleep...
Your books are anything but dull, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you.
They're very entertaining. Oh, my goodness. And the stories, I mean, we could literally sit here for, a month and talk about these crazy stories.
Well, I want to introduce the science and then illustrate it with something that people can relate to and get something out of. One of the things about when people go for a reading, we live in an instant gratification society. People expect a reading to be like Alexa. Alexa, connect to the other side and tell me this. People don't always understand the message when it comes in. I was doing a reading for this young man, and his mother died of cancer. And I kept saying, there's going to be there's the dog, the little dog. And he said, we don't have a dog. That doesn't make any sense. He contacted me after the reading, and he said when his mother died, they were all there, his brother and, her siblings and her husband. He was so upset. He went to one of the bedrooms in her house to lay down, and then he realized there was this little stuffed dog on the bed. And he said he clutched that dog. He goes, now I know that that's what it meant. Okay. I've got a lot of stories along those lines because a lot of times people say...
When you get into quantum physics and what Einstein said, that, time, past, present, and future is an illusion, however persistent, it seems to come up in a lot of your readings where a message comes through that's very, very clear and doesn't become obvious until later on.
Yes. One of my favorites with that... how much time do we have?
I can go as long as you want to go. I'm having a lot of fun here.
Okay. I want
to be respectful of your time as well.
Well, what you just said needs to be explained, and I'm glad that you brought it up. One of the key concepts in my latest book, The Afterlife Frequency, is the electromagnetic soul. And that's my theory on consciousness, which also explains all the forms of spirit communication, reincarnation, near-death experiences. Everything is made of molecules, which in turn are comprised of atoms, which are made of electrons, protons, and neutrons, and all of which are made at the smallest particle of electromagnetic energy known as a quantum. And that means everything. You, me, the headphones we're wearing, the radio waves the show's being broadcast on, the light of the sun.
And what's really cool about that is it's all 99.99% empty space.
And the empty space, too, is made up of these this energy. That's why when people come out of a near-death experience, they say we're all interconnected. That's what Jesus, Buddha, all the great spiritualists are saying is we're all brothers and sisters. We're all connected. And so now we know through quantum physics that we are. It's just that things vibrate at different frequencies. So this pen vibrates at a different frequency than I do. So we think this is an inanimate object, but we vibrate at a different frequency. So the brain does not create consciousness. It merely hosts an EM field, electromagnetic field, which I call the electromagnetic soul. So we are pure consciousness, a soul, a spirit that is eternal electromagnetic energy, which, as the law of thermodynamics and physics, first law of thermodynamics says, energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. Albert Einstein's E equals mc squared says that energy can be converted to matter and vice versa, and they're all tied into light. And let me tell you, that is not even the tip of the iceberg of understanding that. Long story short, on the quantum level, which your soul is. So when we die, the body dies, the brain dies, because that's like a computer hard drive. It didn't create the EMS, the
it's like
electromagnetic
your television
soul.
going out, but the frequency is still out there.
Exactly. So I was doing a reading for this woman, and her mother's spirit started talking about a 7-year-old boy connected to her in this world that has a problem with his eyes. And she said, well, I don't have a son, but my sister does, and he's 7, and he's been complaining about headaches. And she said, get him to the eye doctor. And then I said, now I'm hearing the song by Little Richard, Tutti Frutti All Rudy. And I'm going, Tutti Frutti All Rudy. And she goes, well, that doesn't make any sense at all. She goes, I know, the song, and I know who Little Richard was, but we're not fans. I said, well, that's what your mother's telling me. 2 weeks later, she contacts me. She said, Mark, I called my sister and told her this. She goes, that's really freaky because, yeah, he is complaining about these headaches and that he can't see, like when he's trying to do his homework. So we got to take him to the eye doctor. So my client said, I went with them. So it was my sister, her 7-year-old son, and I. We went to the doctor's office, to the eye doctor. And the second we walked into his office, on the radio, it started playing Tutti Frutti All Rudy by Little Richard.
Not something you often hear these days.
No, you don't. And when people say, oh, you're cold reading, really? Like I'm going to fling out Tutti Frutti, ah, Rudy, really? Yeah. Okay. We're way past 1 billion to 1 on this, but here is what's happening. Yes, it's a great story, but let's go back to Einstein's theory of relativity. On the quantum electromagnetic level, the subatomic level, time doesn't exist. Past, present, and future all happening simultaneously. Her mother's spirit comes through, says, my grandson needs glasses. You need to get him medical attention because she can scan his body, pick up on the anomalies in his eyes, and to prove that you're in the right place at the right time, she was able to perceive another form of electromagnetic energy, which is radio waves, to let them know that this is the song that will be playing when they went to that doctor's appointment a week later. And I see this time and time again. And I love that example because I got a lot of examples with songs like that. But, light is the only form of EM energy visible to the human eye. And if you take, let's say, a yardstick, the visible spectrum is less than 1/8 of an inch. Ultraviolet, infrared, X-rays, gamma rays, microwaves. I mean, you go on and on and on with the different forms of electromagnetic energy. The visible universe, according to NASA, is mostly dark matter, dark energy. We can only perceive without technology less than 10% of the universe.
Yeah, our understanding is this much, and then you add the reticular activator system in that, and then what we focus on, you've narrowed it that much more. It's pretty crazy how our shift to perception can change our experience of reality. And that's, to me, what's so excited about these near-death experiences. Even people that are not leading very nice lives can have an upgrade by getting a shift in perspective.
You can change. Can I tell one more story?
Absolutely.
It's not so metaphysical, but it is a you can change story. Years back, and I'm not practicing law now because I'm concentrating full-time on my work as a medium, researcher, author. But I represented this guy, and I'll never forget, every time he came to the office, all the secretaries, they're all like giggling. He was like one of those photoshopped guys, perfect jaw. I mean, the guy was just about as handsome as it gets, big blue eyes, the curly black hair, chiseled features. And I think he even played Prince Charming at Disney one time. That's how good looking he was. But he was a bad boy. I mean, he had a record a mile long. And he was arrested for possession of some pills, some sedatives. And he was telling me that somebody had borrowed his car and left him in his car. And I'm like, come on, we hear that. No, that's what happened. That's what happened. And I'm looking at his rap sheet. He'd stabbed somebody, grand theft auto. I mean, he was a bad guy. Okay, but a very handsome bad guy. And the thing is, he never did any time because it seemed like because he was so good looking, because good looking people, let's face it, they get treated better. They just do.
He couldn't be that bad. He's so charming and so attractive.
Yeah, especially the problem is we were in front of, and I won't say the judge's name because I understand he's now a federal judge. Okay.
Ouch.
But at the time, he was a circuit court judge, which covers felonies. And we walk into court. And the thing about this judge, if he was wearing his glasses, that was a bad sign because that meant that his contacts were irritating him and he had a headache. And so before he'd go in the courtroom, he'd go, I'll just call him Judge Smith. That wasn't his name, but it's Judge Smith wearing his glasses. I was walking in and I go, Smith wearing his glasses. And one of the other attorneys goes, oh, yeah. And I'm like, uh-oh. So we walk into the courtroom, and so I'm giving my bit, my client's here, blah, da, 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 da. And, because we were trying to get a deal, the prosecutor wasn't really working with us. And the judge says, counsel, I don't want to hear from you. I want to hear from your client. He goes, what happened? He said, well, somebody borrowed my car and left the pills in them. And I'll never forget, the judge took his glasses off and he starts rubbing his temples. And I'm like, uh-oh. And he goes, do you think I'm an idiot? To the client. Oh, that's what happened. He goes, really? You want this court to believe that somebody left these drugs in your car and they're not yours? He goes, well, yes, Your Honor, that's the truth. And he's looking at my client's rap sheet. He goes, you're a very handsome young man. And I could see my client getting ready for the old slap on the wrist. And the judge said, and I think I'm going to send you to a place where your looks will be a detriment rather than a benefit.
Ouch.
And all of a sudden, the color drained from this guy's face. And he said, I'm going to give you exactly 5 minutes to go out in the hall, talk to your lawyer, come back in here and tell me what really happened. All right. So we're out in the hall and this, tough guy's like crying and all this. And I go, dude, you have got to tell the judge the truth. So we go in there and he's shaking and the judge goes, so, this judge was great. He was great. He goes, so, were the drugs yours? Yes, Your Honor. So you lied to the court. Yes, I did, Your Honor. Do you feel better having told me the truth? He goes, well, I don't know yet. and the judge said, I want you to apologize. He goes, I'm sorry. He goes, not to me, to your lawyer. You embarrassed him. And he said, you came in here with a lie, trying to perpetrate this on the court. Okay. And he goes, I can send you to prison for 5 years. And this kid was just shaking. And the judge says, but I will give you one more chance. But he loaded him up. He made him go to drug counseling. He had to go to probation, drug tests like 3 times a week. He hammered this kid. And on the way out, the prosecutor goes, oh, he'll flunk probation. He's a druggie, So about 3 years later, my secretary buzzes me. And she goes, Mark, there's this guy here to see you. And she goes, oh, my God, he's so hot. And I'm like, what? And it was him, and I'm like, well, that's nice. Okay. And he comes in and I'm like, oh, my God, I remembered him. It was hard to remember that, to forget that court appearance. And
like, what did you get busted on this time?
Yeah, so I did. And he said, I just wanted to let you know. He goes, thank you for standing by me that day. He said, he goes, I'm married now. I have a little girl. He goes, he totally turned his life around. I said, so why are you here? He goes, well, I was driving down the road and I saw your office sign and I just wanted to come in and thank you. And out of all the thousands of people I represented, at least I got through to one of them. I think I got through to some more, but most of them, most people don't want to change. So he may not have had a hellish near-death experience, but let me tell you, that judge gave him the next best thing. And that judge let him know, you screw up. And let me tell you, that particular judge, he would hammer you if he felt that was what was necessary. And I really liked that judge. He also was colorblind. And what I mean by that is, we hear about how the legal system unfairly treats African Americans. And yes, the history speaks for itself. And I'll never forget, there was this young African American guy there, and he had, I don't know what it was that he did, but the judge said, I want to sentence you, but before I do, I want you to sit there. And then he brought in all these other defendants that were at least 10 years older and more and hammered one right after the other. And this kid sat there and was like sobbing and crying. And then the judge brought him back up and said, so what have you learned? He said, take a look at all of those people. Continue on the path you are, and that's your future. And I thought, a lot of people used to get down on that judge thinking, oh, he's, real power hungry, but he wasn't. He could have trashed that young black kid's life, but he didn't. He gave him a chance. Scare him
straight. Remember the scared straight thing?
Yeah. And let me tell you, I think to some extent that it does work. And that young man was sitting there and he saw all these guys that, in his community were cool. Well, they're not cool anymore when they're all going to do hard time. Now, why are we talking about that? People can change. You don't need a near-death experience. You don't necessarily need a difficult judge. It is that change that comes when you begin to accept your spiritual nature. And people have to understand nothing spiritual is controlling. What's the difference between spiritual messages and how do you tell if it's a spiritual message? Spiritual messages are never about anger, bigotry, hatred, or violence. They don't incite you to hurt other people. God does not tell you to murder your children. God does not tell you to fly planes into buildings. God does not tell you to put on a suicide vest. God does not tell you to take an AR-15 and go into a public place and shoot people. Those are byproducts of the brain, the human ego, edging God out. The soul is housed in the brain. It doesn't create the brain, but the brain did not create the soul. The brain does create the ego, edging God out. Messages from spirits are about peace, love, compassion, healing, understanding, forgiveness.
And I think it's written in scripture. I'm sure it is. I know
Sure,
and I quote it
sure
all the
it
time,
is.
but you will know them by their fruits. So if people have better behavior, if they're showing more compassion, more love, more generosity, more creativity, more things that result in goodness for humanity, then those are pretty good fruits.
Yes, absolutely. And now the lawyer part of me is jumping in. That does not mean take someone off the street and move them into your house. There are plenty of organizations, churches, and other organizations that need your support, your donations, food, clothing, if you can afford to give money, that will do that. You have to be practical about this, okay? Because I do know a woman who took a man in off the street and he stabbed her to death 70-something times. And I'm not trying to, but what I'm saying is, yes, be compassionate, be loving, but there are organizations which know how to do these things, okay? That's who needs our support. The infrastructure is there. Let's work with it, okay?
Great advice.
Yeah, well, we have to, I'm a spiritual person, but I'm also a practical person, and we have to balance the both. But for the grace of God,
you have time for one more question? Speaking about practical,
sure.
So I'm a big fan of the book Stealing Fire, which you're probably familiar with, but it talks about the Navy SEALs, and since your dad was a psychic Navy SEAL, how did that affect his work? It must have played a role.
It was very difficult for him because he didn't quite understand it. He noticed that before they went into a combat situation, some of his colleagues had this dark aura around them. Those are the ones who died. And so my dad had a unique gift, one I'm kind of thankful I didn't inherit. He could tell when people were going to die. We'd be places and when he was older and he would like shudder. I go, what? He goes, over there. There's that thing over them. And it was really weird. Recently, I saw remember that old TV show, The Twilight Zone? They were playing it.
I've watched every episode.
Yeah. There was an episode where there was a soldier in World War II who could see this weird light on people's faces and then they would die. And I remember, like, I wrote about my dad's ability in one of my books, and somebody said there was a Twilight Zone like that. And I didn't know that. And then I saw it. So this must indicate my dad certainly is not the only person to have that ability. But he said that always was something that got him. He said, you got to trust your gut. Be aware, trust your gut.
Great information. I literally could talk to you for a month. So this has been so delightful. I want to be respectful of your time, and hopefully we can have you on again. We've hardly touched the surface of grief. And I think that's an important one because a lot of
Yes.
people have lost loved ones, and there's nothing more painful than that. You did
No.
say something really beautiful, that grief is the price that you pay for experiencing love, which is really kind of beautiful.
It is. My dear friend, Father Sonny, he was my priest and my friend, and funniest guy. You know, normally you think of priest means really uptight, straight-laced guys. He had this. His order had a condo in Cocoa Beach, Florida, and I went to visit him one time. And he answers the door, and he's wearing a Hawaiian shirt and baggies, and he goes, "Want a margarita?" So it's like, okay. But he was a very, very spiritual man. Like when he was around, you just felt that everything was love. All of his sermons were love. And that's what he told me. He said, "Mark, grief is the price of love. You grieve as deeply as you love." But
that's a beautiful way to look at it.
He said, a life without love isn't much of a life at all. So he said, when you are grieving, remember that. Remember that.
And you also made a really great point in your book that grief has a time and a place to stop so that you can go on living, and that some people get stuck in the grief for maybe not so. And you also indicate along with that you don't know a spirit that's crossed over that is full of regrets. They're on to what they're on to, and it's brighter and more beautiful. Can you just mention your thoughts on that?
Well, yes, but I also want to say that the other side, all the spirits say how wonderful it is, but for our listeners who are coping with depression and loss, Tara and I are in no way encouraging anyone to cut their lives short. We're here for a reason, and every day is a gift, and trust me, some days do not feel like a gift. So you know, if you are feeling that like you want to end your life, reach out. Okay, there's national suicide hotlines. Go to your faith community, go to your friends, you know, go to the professionals, because there's nothing wrong with doing that. That's the healthy thing to do. And so coping with loss, grief does not have an expiration date, but some people allow their grief to take on a life of its own and it becomes their life. But grief can evolve. One of the organizations that I am affiliated with is known as Helping Parents Heal, and helpingparentsheal.com, beautiful organization. And that's what it does. It helps parents who have lost a child, the most devastating loss, to heal. Grief is part of the human condition. It is the posterior's end of the human condition. It is horrible. It's a road nobody wants to take, but one we are shoved down at some point in our life. But you don't have to go through it alone. You know, my books, Never Letting Go, Evidence of Eternity, and the Afterlife Frequency, were inspired by grief. And there are many organizations, faith related or secular. I recommend you never go through grief alone. And for guys, I'm going to talk to the men for a minute. We have tear ducts, feelings and hearts for a reason. It has been scientifically proven that the tears of grief contain the neurotransmitters, the chemicals which cause depression. Crying is healthy. And I know what it is to be a guy, and I had a Navy SEAL for a dad. But my dad said a real man is never afraid to cry for somebody he loves who died. You can do it privately, park your car somewhere, cry away, get it out of you, okay? And you'll feel better. So it is not unmanly to cry. And that's one of the things that I thought about so heavily the day my father died, is that a real man is never afraid to cry for someone he loves who died.
I love that you said that. I love working with men because the courage that it takes them to feel their feelings based on what society has taught them is so much more than it is for women. So that's beautiful. It's in my notes here, and I'm so glad you said that because I have notes that could go on for quite a while in terms of conversation. And I also appreciate what you said about, reaching out, because my understanding is that if somebody were to suicide, it's kind of like failing the second grade. You just go back and re-experience that teaching or lesson. Do you agree with that or not?
I do. Reincarnation is quite complex, and karma is involved. And, we could do a whole show just on reincarnation. So maybe we should schedule that.
Yeah,
and I can talk about the doctrine of samsara. Plus, I've got some case studies, some really fascinating case studies of reincarnation that there's no way to explain it other than this is what it is.
But I really appreciate you making that point that it's not the answer, and reaching out and getting help and connecting with others that can help you is the way to go.
Yeah. Hold on. 988. That's it. We have like 911 for emergency. 988 is the suicide and crisis lifeline. So it's just, if you're having that hard time, 988. And there are trained professionals who are caring, and they're there for you. Life is a beautiful gift, but sometimes it's very lonely and isolating. And everybody has those days, those times where you're in that pit of despair. I like what Winston Churchill said: when you're going through hell, keep going.
And a lot of times relief is just on the other side of whatever it is you're struggling with. It's amazing how many people have the struggle of their life, and as they reach the other side of it, they see the gift in it. Is that what you see often, Mark?
I do. People think, oh, you're always so up and peppy. It's like, oh, I got my days too. There's days, it's like, we all have down days. And the thing is, if life teaches us anything, like, the good times don't always last, but neither do the bad times. Okay. And when it is the message I'd like to leave with everybody is, it was conveyed to me very directly in my enlightenment experience that God exists, heaven, the afterlife exists, our souls, our electromagnetic souls, are immortal living beings. We can communicate with those souls, and that we will all be reunited when it is our time, our appointed time, to leave this material world. And that, to me, is very encouraging. So there are days life doesn't feel very much like a gift, and then there's days that it feels like, you've won first place at the county fair. But most of the time, it's a mix in between. And happiness isn't something that we wallow in. People say, I want to be happy. All right, happiness is not a swimming pool that you slosh around in. Rather, happiness is looking back on a tapestry of your life. And the tapestry is made of many different threads. Some of them are dark and painful. Others are bright and joyous. Happiness is more joyous threads than the neutral ones or the dark and painful ones. And to a large extent, life is what you make it. Sometimes we are dealt a very difficult hand, but that is the challenge of living in the material world.
That is so great. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. I would love to have you on in a future show because there's so much to talk about. Folks, we've been listening to Mark Anthony. He is the author of The Afterlife Frequency, Evidence of Eternity, and Never Letting Go. They're all available on Audible, I believe. Mark, is that right?
They are, and I've got a U.S. tour coming up. Please visit my website, afterlifefrequency.com, just like my book, The Afterlife Frequency, and sign up for my newsletter and go to the calendar of events, and you'll see what I got cooking. Plus, I have a weekly show, The Psychic and the Doc, every Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Call in. I'll do a reading in conjunction with my co-host, Dr. Pat. She's great, and we're here to help. That's why we're here. Just like Dr. Tara Perry is here to help you. And that's why people like Tara and I do what we do. It's like, yes, we have these, incredible experiences and all that, and that's all fine, well, and good, but that's not what it's about. It's about helping other people.
And nothing feels better than that. And we can all do that on some level. Even just smiling at somebody at the supermarket can prevent somebody from committing suicide, or could inspire them to go on and create the cure for the next illness that people are suffering from.
That it can.
So folks, if you got value from this, please click subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode of Next Level Healing.